The massive space station hung in the darkness like a metal city among the stars. Nexus Prime stretched 50 kilometers from end to end, home to millions of alien workers who built the machines that kept the Zephyrian Confederacy running. For over 5,000 years, this station had been the pride of their civilization, a testament to their engineering skills that other species across the galaxy admired and envied. But today, like so many days before, the lights flickered and died. Commander. Veltar stood in the central control room watching his screens go dark one by one. His 4 arms moved quickly across the control panels, trying to restart systems that refused to respond. The fusion reactors that powered the entire station had shut down again, just as they had done thousands of times before. Around him, other Zephyrian engineers worked frantically, their blue skin pale with worry. "How long this time?" asked his assistant, Sub-Commander Krival, her voice tight with frustration. Veltar's large eyes studied the readouts on his remaining emergency displays. "The patterns suggest 15 to 20 days before power returns," he said, his voice heavy with centuries of disappointment. "Same as always." The problem had started small, just occasional power dips that lasted a few minutes. But over the millennia, it had grown worse. Now, every 8:47 standard hours, the entire station would lose power for weeks at a time. During these blackouts, production stopped completely. The military ships waiting for new parts had to delay their missions. Trade agreements fell apart when deliveries failed to arrive on schedule. Veltar had spent the last 300 years of his life trying to solve this mystery. He was not alone in his efforts. The Zephyrian Engineering Guild had assigned their brightest minds to the problem. Thousands of engineers had studied every component, every circuit, every power coupling in the massive station. Their quantum computers had run simulations for decades, modeling every possible failure scenario. The fusion core array itself was a marvel of engineering. 17 massive reactors, each the size of a small building, worked together to provide clean, unlimited energy. The technology was so advanced that it should have worked perfectly for millions of years without maintenance. Every component was built to last longer than most civilizations existed. Yet something was wrong, and none of them could find it. The Zephyrians prided themselves on logical thinking and precise engineering. Their society had built wonders across 12 star systems because they never accepted failure. Every problem had a solution if you applied enough intelligence and resources to find it. But this problem seemed to mock their abilities. "Sir," Krival said quietly, "the Council has sent another message. They want to know when we will have a permanent solution." Veltar's primary hands clenched into fists. The Galactic Council had been patient, but their patience was wearing thin. The Zephyrian military was falling behind in the arms race with other species because they could not maintain steady production. Trade partners were looking elsewhere for reliable suppliers. "Tell them we are exploring new options," Veltar replied. Those new options were limited and humbling. For the first time in their proud history, the Zephyrians were considering asking for help from other species. The idea went against everything they believed about their superiority in engineering and science. The newest members of the Galactic Council were humans, a young species that had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Most Zephyrians considered them primitive, barely worthy of notice. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, held together with what humans called duct tape and hope. They had not even mastered basic energy manipulation that other species learned millennia ago. But the humans had one quality that other species found both amusing and slightly disturbing. They seemed to solve problems in ways that made no logical sense, yet somehow worked. There were stories spreading through the galaxy about human engineers fixing complex alien machines using methods that violated every principle of proper engineering. "Sir," another engineer called from across the control room, "I have an idea that you will not like." Veltar turned to face Engineer Thelgon, one of his most trusted subordinates. "Speak. What if we invited the humans to look at our problem?" Thelgon's voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly would make them more shameful. The control room fell silent. Every Zephyrian present understood the implications. To ask humans for help would be to admit that their greatest minds had failed where primitive aliens might succeed. It would damage their reputation across the galaxy and challenge everything they believed about their own abilities. Veltar stared at the dark screens surrounding him. 5,000 years of failure. Countless resources wasted. Their entire civilizations, future at stake. His pride warred with his desperation, and desperation slowly won. "Contact the human ship New Horizon," he said finally. "Invite their captain to visit our station. Tell him we have an interesting engineering challenge that might benefit from fresh perspective." He did not tell them it was a problem they could not solve. That admission would come later, when pride had been ground down by necessity and hope, had been reduced to asking for help from those they considered their inferiors. Captain Jake Morrison read the message from the Zephyrian station 3 times before he believed it was real. In his 15 years of space exploration, he had never received an invitation from such an advanced alien species. The Zephyrians were legendary throughout the galaxy for their engineering achievements, and they rarely spoke to younger species except when absolutely necessary. "Lisa, Tony, come take a look at this," he called to his chief engineer and systems specialist. Lisa Chen hurried over from the navigation console, wiping grease from her hands with a cloth. She had been working on their atmospheric recycler again, a machine that broke down at least once a week despite her constant attention. Tony Rodriguez followed, carrying a toolbox and wearing the patient expression of someone who spent most of his time fixing things that should have been replaced years ago. The New Horizon was not an impressive ship by galactic standards. Built from salvaged parts and human determination, it held together through careful maintenance and what Jake liked to call creative engineering. Other species found human ships amusing because they looked like collections of spare parts rather than carefully designed vessels. "They want us to visit their famous station," Jake said, showing them the message. "Something about an engineering challenge." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "They want our help? The species that builds machines lasting millions of years wants help from us?" "Maybe they need someone to show them how to fix something with duct tape," Tony joked, but his expression was thoughtful. Jake had served as an aerospace engineer on Earth before joining the exploration program. He understood how different human engineering was from alien approaches. Humans built things that barely worked, then spent enormous effort making them work better. Other species built things that worked perfectly from the beginning. The journey to Nexus Prime took 2 days. As they approached the massive station, even Jake felt intimidated by its size and obvious sophistication. The structure gleamed in, the light of twin suns, its surface covered with intricate patterns that served both functional and artistic purposes. Docking bays large enough to hold entire human cities dotted its hull. "Now I understand why they think we're primitives," Lisa whispered, as their small ship was guided into a docking bay that could have held 100 vessels their size. "Commander." Veltar met them at the airlock with a formal delegation of Zephyrian engineers. Jake was surprised by how tall they were, nearly 8 feet in height, with 4 arms and large eyes that seemed to take in every detail. Their blue skin had intricate patterns that Jake had read indicated rank and specialization. "Welcome to Nexus Prime, Captain Morrison," Veltar said in perfect English. "We appreciate your willingness to visit our facility." The tour that followed was overwhelming. Room after room of advanced technology, manufacturing systems that could build starship components with atomic precision, and computers that processed information faster than the human mind could comprehend. Jake found himself taking notes constantly, trying to understand even the basic principles of what he was seeing. "Your station is incredible," Jake said honestly as they walked through a manufacturing bay the size of a small city. "I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," Veltar replied, but Jake detected something odd in his tone. Pride mixed with frustration, as if the compliment reminded him of something unpleasant. They eventually reached the central control room, where Veltar began explaining their problem. The presentation was thorough and detailed, covering 5,000 years of analysis and failed solutions. Charts and diagrams filled holographic displays, showing power flow patterns, failure cascades, and quantum resonance readings that Jake barely understood. Every 847 hours, our fusion core array experiences complete cascade failure, Veltar explained. We have analyzed every component, run millions of simulations, and consulted with the finest engineering minds in the galaxy. The cause remains unknown. Jake studied the displays, trying to make sense of the technical data. Lisa and Tony asked questions about specific systems, their human perspective already finding details that seemed strange. The Zephyrians answered patiently, but Jake sensed their growing frustration with questions they considered elementary. "Can we see the fusion cores themselves?" Jake asked. "Of course, though I doubt visual inspection will reveal anything our instruments have not detected," Veltar replied. The fusion core chamber was vast, containing 17 massive reactors arranged in a precise geometric pattern. Each reactor hummed with barely contained energy, their surfaces covered with monitoring equipment and control systems. Jake walked slowly around the chamber, not looking at the reactors themselves but at everything else. "These power conduits," he said, pointing to thick cables connecting the reactors to the station's distribution network. "Are they original construction?" "Yes," Veltar replied. "They have functioned perfectly for 5,000 years. Jake knelt beside one of the connections, examining it closely. The technology was far beyond human understanding, but the connection itself looked mechanical rather than purely electronic. "Do these ever require maintenance?" "Our technology does not require maintenance in the way human systems do," Veltar said, a hint of condescension in his voice. "These components are designed to function for geological ages without intervention." "But this is a rotating station, right?" Lisa asked. "You spin it to create artificial gravity in the outer sections?" "Correct. The rotation is precisely controlled and has remained constant for millennia." Tony was examining the chamber's structural supports, his expression puzzled. "The gravitational center of this station. Where exactly is it?" Veltar looked confused by the question. "The gravitational center is maintained in the geometric center of the station, naturally." Jake stood up slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "Has anyone ever checked if the station's rotation has shifted over time, even by tiny amounts?" "Rotation shift is impossible," Veltar replied firmly. "Our stabilization systems maintain perfect rotational integrity." But Jake was no longer listening to the explanations. He was thinking about something much simpler than quantum cascade failures and fusion resonance patterns. He was thinking about the basic mechanical reality of a spinning object in space, influenced by the gravitational pull of twin suns over thousands of years. Jake Morrison spent the night in his assigned quarters aboard Nexus Prime, staring at the ceiling and thinking about spinning objects. The Zephyrians had provided him with thousands of pages of technical documentation, but he kept returning to a simple question that seemed to puzzle them. Why would he care about the station's rotation? The next morning, he met Lisa and Tony in the small dining area reserved for their use. The Zephyrian food was nutritious but bland, designed for efficiency rather than pleasure. "I keep thinking about that power coupling chamber," Jake said, pushing his breakfast around his plate. "Did you notice how those connection points looked?" "They looked like every other advanced alien technology we've seen," Tony replied. "Way beyond our understanding, but somehow familiar at the same time." Lisa nodded slowly. "Actually, I know what you mean. They reminded me of the power connections on our old orbital platforms back home. Sophisticated versions of the same basic idea. Exactly, Jake said. And what's the most common problem with power connections on spinning structures? The answer came to all three of them simultaneously. Mechanical stress from rotational forces. Jake pushed his plate away and pulled out his tablet, sketching a rough diagram of the station. Look, this station has been spinning for 5,000 years. It's held in place by the gravitational interaction with those twin suns. Over time, even tiny changes in the gravitational field would cause microscopic shifts in the rotation. But their computers would detect major rotational changes, Lisa pointed out. Major changes, yes. But what about changes so small that they fall within the margin of error? Changes that accumulate over centuries? Tony caught on quickly. If the station's rotation shifted even slightly, it would put stress on any physical connections between the central core and the outer sections. And that stress would build up slowly over time, Jake continued, until something gives way. They spent the next hour working through the mathematics, using their tablets to calculate how rotational drift might affect the power coupling system. The numbers were small, almost insignificant by engineering standards, but they were consistent, with the 847-hour failure cycle. When they presented their theory to Commander Veltar, his reaction was immediate and negative. Impossible, he said flatly. Our rotational control systems maintain perfect stability. The gravitational influences you describe are negligible compared to our station's mass. But have you actually measured the station's exact rotational position over time? Jake asked. I mean precise measurements, not just general stability readings. Veltar's large eyes blinked slowly. Our systems monitor rotational stability continuously. Significant variations would trigger immediate alerts. What about insignificant variations? Tiny changes that happen so slowly they don't trigger alerts? The commander was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he activated his communication device and spoke in rapid Zephyrian to someone elsewhere on the station. A few minutes later, a young engineer arrived carrying a portable analysis device. Engineer Morthek specializes in structural analysis, Veltar explained. She can provide precise rotational measurements. Morthek was smaller than the other Zephyrians Jake had met, with intricate patterns on her skin that indicated high technical rank despite her youth. She listened to Jake's request with obvious skepticism, but began taking measurements with her device. I am scanning for rotational variance over the past 1,000 years, she said, her voice carrying the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. The data shows normal operational parameters with no significant deviation. Can you check for deviations smaller than your normal threshold? Jake asked. Changes that might be considered too small to matter? Morthek adjusted her device settings, frowning as she worked. Her expression slowly changed from skepticism to confusion, then to alarm. Commander, she said quietly, there are micro-variations in our rotational axis. Very small changes that have been accumulating over centuries. Veltar moved quickly to look at her readings. How small? Individual variations are measured in fractions of degrees, but the cumulative effect over 5,000 years shows a total shift of nearly 3 degrees from our original rotational axis. The control room fell silent. 3 degrees was tiny by most measures, but for a structure the size of Nexus Prime, it represented enormous forces acting on any physical connections between different sections of the station. Show me the timing of these rotational changes, Jake said. Morthek manipulated her device, displaying a timeline of the micro-shifts. The pattern was clear. The station's rotation shifted in a regular cycle, influenced by its orbital position, relative to the twin suns. Every 847 hours, the station reached the point in its orbit where gravitational stress was greatest. This cannot be the cause of our power failures, Veltar insisted. Our power couplings are designed to handle enormous stresses. Let's go look at them again, Jake suggested. Back in the fusion core chamber, Jake approached the power connections with new understanding. He borrowed a basic inspection tool from Tony and examined the coupling points more carefully. What he found made his heart race with excitement. "Lisa, come look at this," he called. She knelt beside him, following his pointing finger to a connection point between one of the fusion reactors and the main power distribution network. The connection looked perfect from a distance, but close examination revealed something the Zephyrian instruments had missed. "Is that what I think it is?" she whispered. "Physical wear patterns," Jake confirmed. "These connections have been working loose over thousands of years." The evidence was subtle, but unmistakable. Microscopic scoring on the metal surfaces where components had shifted against each other. Tiny gaps that should not exist in perfectly fitted parts. The kind of wear that happened when mechanical connections experienced repeated stress cycles over enormous periods of time. "Commander Veltar," Jake called, "I think we found your problem." The Zephyrian engineer approached reluctantly, clearly skeptical that humans could identify something his advanced instruments had missed. Jake showed him the wear patterns, explaining how repeated rotational stress had gradually loosened the physical connections. Every 847 hours, when the gravitational stress peaks, these loose connections finally fail completely, Jake explained. The cascade failure happens because all 17 connections are experiencing the same stress cycle. Veltar stared at the connections for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he activated his scanner and performed a detailed analysis of the coupling points. The results confirmed what Jake had discovered through simple visual inspection. 5,000 years of advanced analysis, Veltar said quietly, and we never considered that something might simply work loose. The silence in the fusion core chamber stretched for nearly a minute as Commander Veltar processed what Jake had shown him. Around them, other Zephyrian engineers gathered to examine the loose connections, their scanners confirming what human eyes had spotted first. "The solution should be simple," Jake said carefully, not wanting to sound condescending. "Tighten the connections and install mechanical stabilizers to prevent them from working loose again." "Simple," Veltar repeated, his voice hollow. "Well, relatively simple. We'd need to shut down each reactor individually, secure the connections, and install brackets to handle the rotational stress. Maybe 8 to 10 hours of work." Sub-Commander Kreval spoke up from across the chamber. "Captain Morrison, you understand that these are fusion reactors containing the energy output of small stars? Shutting them down incorrectly could destroy the entire station." Jake nodded. "On Earth, we call that taking proper safety precautions. But the work itself is just mechanical maintenance." The phrase mechanical maintenance seemed to hit the Zephyrians like a physical blow. Engineer Morthek actually stepped backward, her skin patterns flickering with what Jake was learning to recognize as emotional distress. "Our technology does not require mechanical maintenance," she said, repeating what had become a common refrain during Jake's visit. "All technology requires maintenance," Tony said gently. "Even the best designed systems need someone to check that everything is still where it's supposed to be." Veltar was studying his scanner readings with the intensity of someone trying to find an error in the data. "Captain Morrison, assuming your analysis is correct, what exactly would this repair process involve?" Jake pulled out his tablet and began sketching a basic diagram. "First, we shut down one reactor at a time and disconnect its power coupling. Then we clean the connection surfaces, apply proper torque to the mechanical fasteners, and install stabilizing brackets to prevent future loosening. Finally, we test the connection under load before moving to the next reactor." "Stabilizing brackets," Veltar said slowly. "You mean additional mechanical components?" "Basic ones. Think of them as clamps that hold the connections steady despite rotational stress. We use similar things on Earth whenever we have moving parts that need to stay connected." Lisa was examining the power couplings with renewed interest. "Jake, these connections are actually built like oversized versions of the power junctions we use on orbital platforms. The Zephyrians just made them bigger and prettier. Which means we understand the basic principles involved, Jake realized. We've been dealing with this exact type of problem for decades. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The Zephyrians had spent 5,000 years trying to solve a problem that human engineers encountered and fixed regularly. The difference was that humans expected things to work loose and planned accordingly, while Zephyrian engineering philosophy assumed that properly designed components would never fail. "Commander," Jake said, "with your permission, my team and I can implement this fix. We'll need some basic tools and materials for the stabilizing brackets, but nothing exotic." Veltar looked around at his engineering staff, reading expressions that Jake was beginning to understand. Fear mixed with desperate hope, professional pride warring with the need for a solution. "If you are wrong," Veltar said finally, "if this procedure damages our fusion cores, the consequences could be catastrophic." "If we're wrong, you're no worse off than you are now," Jake replied. "And if we're right, your 5,000-year problem goes away." The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. Zephyrian engineers raised dozens of technical objections, most of which boiled down to disbelief that such an advanced problem could have such a simple solution. Jake answered their questions patiently, explaining human maintenance procedures and mechanical engineering principles. Finally, Veltar made the decision. "We will attempt your solution, Captain Morrison, but we will proceed with extreme caution." The preparation took another 2 hours. Zephyrian safety protocols were extensive, requiring multiple backup systems and emergency procedures for every step of the process. Jake found their caution admirable, even if it made simple repairs take much longer than necessary. The actual work began with shutting down fusion reactor number 1. Jake watched nervously as the Zephyrians performed their shutdown sequence, knowing that human technology would never have so many safeguards and redundancies. "Power coupling is now accessible," announced the reactor technician. Jake approached the connection point with Tony and Lisa, carrying tools that looked primitive compared to Zephyrian equipment. The irony was not lost on him that he was about to fix advanced alien technology using wrenches and metal brackets. "Connection point shows significant loosening," Lisa confirmed, using a human torque wrench to check the fastener tension. "Maybe 60% of proper specification. No wonder it fails under stress," Tony added, beginning to clean corrosion and debris from the connection surfaces. The repair itself was anticlimactic. 30 minutes to clean and retighten the connection, another hour to fabricate and install a stabilizing bracket that would prevent future loosening. The bracket was crude by Zephyrian standards, made from basic metal stock and fastened with simple bolts, but it was engineered to handle the specific stresses causing the problem. "Reactor 1 back online," the technician announced after Jake's team finished their work. They moved to Reactor 2, then 3, working steadily through the array. Each connection showed the same pattern of gradual loosening, confirming Jake's diagnosis. The Zephyrian engineers watched in fascination as human tools and techniques solved problems their advanced technology could not even detect. "I do not understand how your simple tools can achieve proper torque specifications," Morthek said, watching Tony use a mechanical wrench. "Sometimes simple tools work better because you can feel what they're doing," Tony explained. "These electronic torque sensors on your equipment are very precise, but they can't tell you if something feels wrong." By the time they reached Reactor 17, word had spread throughout the station. Crowds of Zephyrian engineers gathered to watch humans perform mechanical maintenance on their most advanced technology. Some looked skeptical, others fascinated, but all were clearly witnessing something they had never seen before. "Final connection secured," Jake announced, stepping back from the last power coupling. "All reactors show stable connections with stress-resistant brackets installed." The moment of truth came when they reached hour 847 of the current cycle. Jake found himself holding his breath as the time approached, despite his confidence in the solution. Around him, dozens of Zephyrian engineers monitored every system, waiting to see if 5,000 years of failure would finally end. Hour 8:47 passed without incident. The fusion cores continued running smoothly, their power output stable and consistent. The cascade failure pattern that had defined their existence simply did not occur. The control room of Nexus Prime had never been so quiet. Every Zephyrian engineer stood motionless, staring at displays that showed something they had not seen in 5,000 years. Stable power output passed the 8:47-hour mark. The numbers on. The screens seemed impossible, like a violation of natural law. Commander Veltar ran diagnostic after diagnostic, convinced that his instruments must be malfunctioning. The fusion cores hummed with steady energy, their output graphs showing straight lines instead of the chaotic spikes that preceded cascade failure. Hour 8:48 passed, then 8:49, then 8:50. "This cannot be real," whispered Subcommander Kreval, her 4 hands trembling as she operated her control panel. Jake Morrison stood quietly in the corner, watching the Zephyrians struggle to accept what their own instruments were telling them. He understood their shock. For 50 centuries, cascade failure had been as predictable as sunrise. To see it simply not happen challenged everything they believed about their technology and their understanding of engineering. "Commander." "Engineer," Morthek said, her voice barely audible. "Power output has remained stable for 6 hours past normal failure time. All systems show optimal performance." Veltar turned to look at Jake, his large eyes filled with an emotion that Jake could not quite identify. It might have been gratitude or wonder or possibly horror at the implications of what had just occurred. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said slowly, "it appears that your solution is working." "It's working because the problem was exactly what we thought it was," Jake replied. "Loose connections causing mechanical failure under rotational stress." The words hung in the air like an accusation. 5,000 years of analysis by the greatest minds in Zephyrian civilization. Uncounted resources spent on research and failed. Solutions, all defeated by a maintenance problem that any human engineer would have checked in the first hour of investigation. "How did we miss something so fundamental?" Morthek asked, her question directed at no one in particular. Lisa Chen stepped forward, her expression sympathetic. "You missed it because your technology is too good. When human engineers design something, we assume it will break and plan accordingly. We build in maintenance schedules and replacement procedures because we know that everything wears out eventually. But your technology is designed to last for geological ages," Tony added. "The idea that something might work loose over time probably never occurred to you because it contradicts your basic engineering philosophy." Jake nodded. "You created a system so advanced that you forgot about the simple mechanical realities that still apply. Friction, thermal expansion, metal fatigue, gravitational stress. These things affect every physical system, no matter how well designed." The implications were staggering, and Jake could see the Zephyrian engineers beginning to understand them. If their most important installation had been crippled by such a simple oversight, what other problems might exist throughout their civilization? How many other impossible failures might actually be basic maintenance issues? "We need to contact the Engineering Guild immediately," Veltar said, activating his communication system. "This discovery will require a complete review of our maintenance protocols." "Actually," Jake said carefully, "you might want to think about this more systematically. How many other installations experience unexplained failures? How many problems have you classified as impossible to solve because they don't fit your theoretical models?" The question clearly disturbed Veltar. The Zephyrian approach to engineering was based on creating perfect systems that required no maintenance. To discover that this philosophy had blind spots was like discovering that mathematics itself was flawed. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said, "would you be willing to extend your stay and examine some of our other installations? We have several, facilities experiencing problems that our engineers cannot solve. Jake exchanged glances with Lisa and Tony. The request was unprecedented. The Zephyrians were essentially admitting that their entire approach to engineering might be fundamentally flawed and asking humans to help them fix it. "We'd be happy to help," Jake said, "but I think you might benefit more from learning our diagnostic methods than from having us solve individual problems. The real issue isn't any specific failure, it's the assumption that properly designed systems never need maintenance." Over the following days, Jake and his team worked with Zephyrian engineers to develop new diagnostic procedures. They taught them to look for wear patterns, stress indicators, and the subtle signs of mechanical fatigue that human engineers checked routinely. Most importantly, they introduced the concept of preventive maintenance. "You schedule maintenance before things break," Jake explained to a group of fascinated Zephyrian engineers. "Instead of waiting for failure, you regularly inspect and service critical components." "But if the systems are properly designed, why would they need service?" asked one engineer. "Because even proper design cannot eliminate the basic forces of physics," Lisa replied. "Gravity, friction, thermal expansion, and metal fatigue affect everything. The trick is to account for these forces and plan accordingly." The cultural shift required was enormous. The Zephyrians had built their entire civilization on the idea that superior engineering could create systems that never failed. To accept that all systems required ongoing maintenance meant abandoning a fundamental belief about the nature of technology. But the evidence was undeniable. As Jake's diagnostic methods were applied to other installations, they found problem after problem that had been classified as impossible or beyond current understanding. Loose connections, worn components, and accumulated stress damage that had been overlooked because they did not fit theoretical models. The news spread beyond Nexus Prime to other Zephyrian facilities, then to other star systems. The species that had prided itself on technological perfection was discovering that their approach had critical blind spots. The revelation was humbling and transformative. Jake found himself at the center of a revolution in Zephyrian engineering philosophy. The alien engineers who had initially viewed humans as primitive were now eager to learn human maintenance techniques. The species that had considered themselves the galaxy's greatest engineers were taking lessons from the species they had once dismissed. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said on their final day at Nexus Prime, "you have given us more than a solution to our power problem. You have given us a new way of understanding engineering itself." "Understanding is good," Jake replied, "but the real lesson is simpler than that. No matter how advanced your technology becomes, someone still needs to check that the bolts are tight." The words became something of a motto among Zephyrian engineers, a reminder that even the most sophisticated systems were built from basic components that followed basic physical laws. It was a lesson that would reshape their civilization and their relationship with technology itself. The news of what happened at Nexus Prime traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every major civilization in the galaxy. Within days, species across hundreds of star systems were discussing the impossible story. Humans had solved a 5,000-year-old Zephyrian engineering problem in less than a day. Ambassador Thalaron of the Galactic Council received the official report while attending a trade negotiation session on the neutral world of Kepler Station. The Andromedian diplomat was known for his calm demeanor and logical approach to interspecies relations, but the report made him read the same paragraph 3 times before he believed what he was seeing. The human engineering team successfully identified and resolved the cascade failure problem affecting Nexus Prime through basic mechanical maintenance procedures, the report stated in formal Zephyrian language. The solution involved tightening loose power connections and installing stabilizing brackets to prevent future loosening due to rotational stress. Thalaron set down his tablet and stared out the viewport at the stars. The Zephyrians were not given to exaggeration or false claims. If they said that humans had solved their greatest engineering mystery through basic mechanical maintenance, Then that was exactly what had happened. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrians had been considered the premier engineering species in the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Their technology was studied and copied by dozens of other civilizations. If they had been blind to such a fundamental problem, what did that say about the rest of galactic engineering? Sir, his aide approached cautiously. The Zephyrian ambassador has requested an emergency session of the Engineering Council. He wants to discuss what he calls fundamental revisions to galactic engineering standards. Thalaron nodded slowly. Schedule the session and send a priority message to Earth requesting detailed information about human engineering practices. The emergency session took place 2 days later in the council chambers, a vast amphitheater that could accommodate representatives from 40 different species. Ambassador Velkoth of the Zephyrian Confederacy stood at the central podium, his forearms gesturing as he explained what had happened at Nexus Prime. For 5 millennia, our greatest minds analyzed this problem using the most advanced techniques known to our civilization, Velkoth said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We failed because we had forgotten the most basic principle of engineering. All mechanical systems require maintenance. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some species laughed, thinking the story must be an elaborate joke. Others sat in stunned silence, realizing the implications for their own technology. The Crystalline Collective, known for their perfect molecular engineering, began urgent whispered consultations among their representatives. Ambassador Velkoth called out the representative from the hegemony of Vega. Are you seriously telling us that your station failed because some bolts came loose? That is precisely what I am telling you, Velkoth replied. And our failure to recognize this possibility represents a fundamental flaw in our engineering philosophy. Captain Jake Morrison had been invited to address the council via quantum communication link from his ship. His image appeared on the main display, showing a middle-aged human in a simple uniform that looked primitive compared to the elaborate garments worn by other species representatives. Captain Morrison, Ambassador Thalaron said, please explain to the council how your team identified this problem so quickly. Jake's image flickered slightly as the communication link adjusted. We looked for the simplest explanation first. When you have an intermittent failure that follows a regular pattern, you start with basic mechanical causes before moving to complex theoretical ones. But surely your instruments detected the same anomalies that Zephyrian technology missed, asked the Andromedian representative. Actually, no, Jake replied. We identified the problem through visual inspection. Tony Rodriguez noticed wear patterns on the connection points that indicated movement over time. Our instruments are much less sophisticated than Zephyrian equipment, so we rely more on direct observation and hands-on diagnosis. The chamber erupted in discussion. The idea that primitive human eyes could detect what advanced alien sensors missed challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technological sophistication and diagnostic capability. The lesson here, Jake continued, is not that human methods are superior to yours. It's that different approaches can reveal different types of problems. The Zephyrians were looking for complex quantum effects and molecular-level failures. We were looking for loose bolts. Over the following weeks, the story spread beyond official diplomatic channels. Traders carried the tale from system to system, often embellishing it in the telling. Engineers throughout the galaxy began to question their own assumptions about maintenance and failure analysis. The hegemony of Vega, a militaristic species known for their advanced weapons technology, quietly began reviewing their own mysterious equipment failures. They discovered that several impossible problems with their battlecruisers were actually caused by thermal expansion loosening critical connections during extended space combat. The Crystalline Collective, whose technology was based on growing, perfect crystal matrices, found that some of their failures were caused by microscopic stress fractures that accumulated over centuries. Their diagnostic equipment was designed to detect major structural flaws, not tiny cracks that grew slowly over time. Most surprisingly, The ancient ethereal assembly, the oldest known civilization in the galaxy, sent a formal request to Earth, asking for consultation on several engineering problems they had been unable to solve for millennia. If beings who had been building starships when most species were still discovering fire wanted human engineering advice, then something fundamental had changed in galactic society. The economic implications were immediate and far-reaching. Species that had relied entirely on Zephyrian engineering excellence began developing their own maintenance protocols. Trade agreements were renegotiated to include service and support provisions that had never been considered necessary before. Human engineering companies, previously considered barely competent by galactic standards, suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with consultation requests. The New Horizon received 17 different offers to purchase Jake's ship and hire his crew, with compensation packages that would have made them wealthy beyond imagination. But the most significant change was philosophical. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had pursued ever greater technological complexity, assuming that sufficiently advanced systems would never fail. The Nexus Prime incident proved that even the most sophisticated technology was still subject to basic physical laws. "We have been building monuments to our own cleverness," wrote the chief engineer of the Andromedian fleet in a widely circulated, technical paper. "Perhaps it is time to build systems that acknowledge the reality of entropy and plan accordingly." The transformation was not universal. Some species refused to accept that their engineering approaches might be flawed. The silicon-based Geometrics issued a formal statement declaring that their mathematical perfection made maintenance unnecessary. The hive minds of Tau Ceti insisted that their collective intelligence prevented the kind of oversights that had plagued the Zephyrians, but even the skeptics began quietly implementing diagnostic procedures that looked for the kinds of basic mechanical problems that humans routinely checked. No one wanted to be the next species to discover that their greatest technological achievement had been crippled by a loose bolt. Jake Morrison found himself transformed from an unknown explorer into one of the most famous humans in the galaxy. His name was spoken with respect in engineering circles that had never before acknowledged human technical capability. But when asked about his newfound fame, he remained characteristically modest. "We didn't do anything special," he told reporters at a press conference on Earth. "We just remembered that everything breaks eventually and planned accordingly." 6 months after the Nexus Prime incident, Commander Veltar stood in what had once been a storage bay and was now the first human Zephyrian engineering exchange center. The space buzzed with activity as engineers from both species worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques that neither could have developed alone. The latest efficiency reports show a 30% improvement in overall system reliability, Sub-Commander Kreval reported, reading from her tablet. "The preventive maintenance protocols have eliminated 94% of our previously unexplained failures." Veltar nodded, watching a young Zephyrian engineer learn to use a human torque wrench under the patient instruction of Chief Engineer Lisa Chen. The sight would have been unthinkable a year ago, when Zephyrian engineers considered manual tools beneath their dignity. "The most surprising discovery," Kreval continued, "is how much our diagnostic capabilities have improved. By combining our sensor technology with human observational techniques, we can identify problems that neither approach could detect alone." The partnership had begun cautiously. Many Zephyrians resented the implication that their engineering was flawed, while some humans worried about being overshadowed by superior alien technology. But practical necessity had overcome cultural pride as both species discovered the benefits of collaboration. Captain Jake Morrison entered the center carrying a coffee cup and wearing the casual demeanor that still surprised Zephyrian visitors. As the first human to hold the rank of senior engineering consultant to the Zephyrian Confederacy, he could have demanded elaborate ceremonies and formal protocols. Instead, he preferred to work directly with engineers on practical problems. "How's the training program progressing?" Jake asked Veltar. "Better than anticipated," Veltar replied. Our engineers are adapting to human diagnostic methods faster than we expected. Yesterday, engineer Morthek identified a potential failure in our atmospheric recycling system using nothing but visual inspection and a mechanical stethoscope. Jake smiled. Sometimes the old ways work best. What did she find? Bearing wear in the primary circulation pump. Our instruments showed normal operation, but she heard irregular vibrations that indicated impending failure. We replaced the bearings 2 days before the system would have broken down. It was exactly the kind of success story that had become common throughout Zephyrian space. Engineers trained in human diagnostic techniques were identifying problems weeks or months before they became critical failures. The economic impact was enormous, saving countless resources and preventing production delays. Tony Rodriguez emerged from behind a complex piece of machinery, wiping oil from his hands. The quantum resonance chamber is running perfectly now, he announced. Turned out to be a loose mounting bracket causing micro-vibrations in the containment field. Another loose bracket, Veltar mused. 6 months ago, I would have considered that diagnosis impossible. The training center represented more than just technical cooperation. It had become a symbol of how different approaches to engineering could complement each other. Zephyrian precision and advanced technology combined with human intuition and mechanical understanding created solutions that neither species could achieve alone. Jake, Lisa called from across the bay. We've got a communication from the Andromedian fleet. They want to schedule another consultation. The success at Nexus Prime had led to requests from dozens of other species. Human engineering teams were now working throughout the galaxy, applying their diagnostic methods to problems that had puzzled alien civilizations for centuries. Each success reinforced humanity's growing reputation as the galaxy's troubleshooters. What's the Andromedian problem this time? Jake asked. Intermittent failures in their navigation computers. Their ships occasionally lose course for no apparent reason, and their engineers can't find any pattern to the failures. Jake grinned. Sounds like another loose connection to me. Maybe in their primary navigation linkage. You cannot possibly diagnose their problem without examining it, Veltar protested, though his tone was more amused than critical. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But I've learned that when alien engineers say no apparent pattern, they usually mean, we haven't looked at the simple mechanical causes yet. The prediction would prove accurate. 3 weeks later, an Andromedian engineering team would discover that their navigation failures were caused by thermal expansion in their computer mounting systems. During long-distance flights, temperature variations caused critical connections to loosen just enough to disrupt data flow. But the partnership was changing humans as much as aliens. Human engineers working with Zephyrian technology were learning to think on scales they had never imagined. The precision and longevity of alien systems inspired new approaches to human engineering that would revolutionize Earth's technology. Captain Morrison, Engineer Morthek approached with obvious excitement. I wanted to show you the results of our latest collaboration project. She led him to a workstation where human and Zephyrian engineers had been working together to design a new type of fusion reactor. The design combined Zephyrian energy manipulation techniques with human maintenance accessibility, creating a system that was both more powerful and more reliable than either species could build alone. The reactor incorporates modular components that can be easily accessed and serviced, Morthek explained, but it uses our quantum containment technology to achieve energy densities previously impossible. Jake studied the blueprints with growing admiration. This is beautiful work. How long is the maintenance interval? 6 months for routine inspection, 2 years for major component replacement. The entire system can be serviced without shutting down the reactor core. It was revolutionary. Traditional Zephyrian reactors were designed to run for millennia without maintenance, but required complete shutdown for any repairs. Human reactors could be easily serviced, but lacked the power output for large-scale applications. The hybrid, Design offered the best of both approaches. "When do we build the prototype?" Jake asked. "Construction begins next month at the Kepler Station shipyards," Veltar replied. "If successful, this design will become the standard for all new Zephyrian installations." The implications were staggering. Within a generation, hybrid human-alien technology might power the entire galaxy. More importantly, the collaborative approach that made it possible was spreading to other fields beyond engineering. Human psychologists were working with Zephyrian social planners to design better living spaces. Human musicians were collaborating with alien composers to create new art forms. Human farmers were sharing cultivation techniques with species that had never considered agriculture as anything more than industrial food production. "You know what this really represents?" Jake said, gesturing around the bustling center. "What?" Veltar asked. "Proof that being different is better than being perfect. The Zephyrians were perfect engineers according to their own standards, but they were blind to simple mechanical problems. Humans are crude engineers by galactic standards, but we see things you miss. Together, we're better than either of us alone." Veltar considered this for a moment, his large eyes thoughtful. "You are suggesting that diversity itself is a form of technology." "Exactly. Different perspectives, different approaches, different blind spots. When you combine them, you get solutions that no single viewpoint could discover. It was a lesson that would reshape galactic civilization in ways that no one could yet imagine. The age of isolated species pursuing technological perfection was ending, replaced by an era of collaboration and shared knowledge that would carry them all to achievements none could reach alone. 5 years had passed since Jake Morrison first set foot on Nexus Prime, and the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The human Zephyrian Engineering Exchange Center had grown from a single converted storage bay into a massive complex spanning 3 space stations, training thousands of engineers from dozens of species. Jake stood in his office aboard the newest facility, looking out at a view that still amazed him. Ships from across the galaxy docked regularly at the station, bringing engineers eager to learn the collaborative techniques that had revolutionized galactic technology. The sight of human and alien engineers working together had become so common that young people could barely imagine a time when such cooperation seemed impossible. "Captain Morrison," his assistant announced over the intercom, "the graduation ceremony is ready to begin." Jake straightened his formal uniform, still uncomfortable with the elaborate decorations that came with his position as Director of Interspecies Engineering Cooperation. Today marked the graduation of the largest class in the program's history. 300 engineers from 27 different species, all trained in the diagnostic and maintenance techniques that had started with a loose bolt on a Zephyrian space station. The ceremony was held in the main auditorium, a space designed to accommodate the wildly different physical requirements of various species. Jake walked to the podium, looking out at an audience that would have been impossible to imagine just a few years earlier. In the front row sat Commander Veltar, now bearing the title of Chief Coordinator for Zephyrian Human Technical Exchange. His presence was a reminder of how much both species had changed. The proud engineer who had once considered human technology primitive now regularly consulted with human mechanics on complex problems. 5 years ago, Jake began, a simple mechanical failure taught us something important about the nature of engineering and cooperation. Today, we graduate engineers who represent the future of galactic technology. The graduates represented more than just technical training. They were living proof that the barriers between species were less important than their shared challenges. Jake could see humans sitting next to Zephyrians, Andromedians working with crystalline entities, and species that had barely spoken to each other now collaborating on joint projects. The lesson of Nexus Prime was not that human engineering is superior to alien technology, Jake continued. The lesson was that different approaches to the same problem can reveal solutions that no single perspective could find alone. In the audience, he spotted Tony Rodriguez and Lisa Chen, both now senior instructors in the program. Tony had become famous throughout the galaxy for his ability to diagnose mechanical problems by sound, while Lisa had developed new theoretical frameworks that combined human intuition with alien precision. Today's graduates will return to their home worlds carrying more than just technical knowledge. They carry the understanding that cooperation produces better results than competition, that diversity is a strength rather than a weakness, and that even the most advanced technology benefits from the simple recognition that everything needs maintenance. The results of the program were visible throughout galactic civilization. Trade routes that had been plagued by equipment failures now operated with unprecedented reliability. Military conflicts had decreased as species found it more profitable to share technology than to fight over resources. The collaborative approach pioneered by human and Zephyrian engineers had spread to diplomacy, commerce, and science. The universe is vast and complex, Jake said, but the problems we face are often simpler than we think. Sometimes the solution to a 5,000-year mystery is just knowing which bolt to tighten. The audience laughed, recognizing the reference to the story that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. Children on dozens of worlds grew up hearing about the human engineer who solved an impossible problem by remembering to check if things were properly fastened. After the ceremony, Jake walked through the station's corridors, observing the daily miracle of interspecies cooperation that had become routine. In one laboratory, human and Zephyrian engineers worked together on a new type of faster-than-light drive that combined the best elements of both technologies. In another, Andromedian physicists collaborated with human mechanics to design self-repairing spacecraft that could maintain themselves during long-distance exploration missions. "Captain Morrison," a voice called behind him. Jake turned to see Engineer Morthek approaching, no longer the young technician who had first measured rotational variance at Nexus Prime. She now held the rank of Senior Diagnostic Specialist and had trained hundreds of engineers in the techniques that had saved her civilization's greatest installation. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, "not just for solving our problem, but for teaching us to think differently about engineering itself." "You don't need to thank me," Jake replied. "You and your people taught us just as much." The reactor. "Designs we're building now are better than anything either of our species could create alone." It was true. The hybrid technologies emerging from the collaboration programs were advancing galactic civilization at an unprecedented rate. Fusion reactors that could be easily maintained while producing enormous amounts of clean energy. Spacecraft that combined alien durability with human serviceability. Communication systems that merged advanced alien science with practical human engineering. "What's next for the program?" Morthek asked. Jake smiled, thinking about the reports on his desk. "We've got requests from the Ethereal Assembly to help with some engineering problems they've been struggling with for 10,000 years. Apparently, even beings that old sometimes forget to check if their connections are tight." The irony was not lost on either of them. The oldest civilization in the galaxy was asking for help from one of the youngest, not because humans were more advanced, but because they approached problems differently. "And there's something else," Jake added. "The Galactic Council has approved funding for the next phase of the exchange program. We're going to establish training centers in every major star system, spreading the collaborative approach throughout the galaxy." The vision was ambitious but achievable. Within a generation, every species in galactic civilization would have engineers trained in the diagnostic techniques and cooperative methods that had revolutionized technology. The age of isolated species pursuing individual technological advancement was ending, replaced by an era of shared knowledge and mutual support. As Jake returned to his office, he passed a memorial plaque that had been installed near the main entrance. It bore a simple inscription: "In memory of 5,000 years of cascade failures at Nexus Prime, solved by remembering that even the most advanced technology is still built from basic components that follow basic laws." Below the inscription was a small bracket, identical to the ones that Tony Rodriguez had installed to prevent the power couplings from working loose. It served as a reminder that the most profound solutions were often the simplest ones, and that progress came not from abandoning basic principles, but from remembering to apply them. Jake sat at his desk and opened his computer, reviewing the applications for next semester's program. Engineers from species he had never heard of were requesting training in human diagnostic techniques. The waiting list was 3 years long and growing. He thought about the chain of events that had started, with a routine invitation to visit an alien space station. A simple problem with a simple solution had transformed galactic civilization, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from advancing beyond basic principles, but from remembering to apply them. The universe was vast and complex, filled with technologies that could manipulate matter and energy in ways that seemed like magic. But underneath all the complexity, the same basic laws still applied. Things still came loose, components still wore out, and someone still needed to remember to check that the bolts were tight.